The true daughter of the Gu family, a top tycoon in Beijing who has been lost for many years, has been found back. She has a good and gentle personality, a decent temperament, and is highly favored by the Gu family. After hearing this, everyone sneered. A bumpkin girl who grew up in the countryside couldn't compete with the excellent and intelligent adopted daughter of the Gu family since childhood. She waited for her to be rejected by the Gu family and kicked out of the house. Who would have known that the true daughter, not only did he not lose his favor, but he also became a group favorite, chatting and laughing with fake airs, holding hands and shopping. Finally, layers of vests were revealed, and this person's personality was neither obedient nor gentle, but in fact, he was a crazy critic. Both fierce and wild, it is a poisonous carnivorous flower with a black belly. This is not the most shocking. What really caused a sensation was her official announcement with some noble and cold disease tycoon. Everyone was surprised. When did you two pull up evidence? After the true face of Gu Yanwan was exposed, her relationship with Gu Jizhou caused concern among everyone, fearing that this poisonous and crazy cannibalistic flower would harm the precious jailing flower. After hearing about this, Gu Yanwan smiled inexplicably. She was clear about the dark and melancholic hidden beneath that gentle skin. She is a poisonous cannibal flower that he personally raised. Shuangwen plus Sweet One, female strong, male strong, 1v1, ability, keywords of the novel. Crazy criticism of the true daughter. She always pretends to be obedient without pop-ups. Crazy criticism of the true daughter. She always pretends to be obedient. Download the complete TXT collection. Crazy criticism of the true daughter. She always pretends to be obedient and reads the latest chapters. Chapter 1. The True Daughter of the Gu Family. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. The True Daughter of the Gu Family. Capital, Gu Family. 3. Miss Gu, please have some tea. The servant handed the brewed tea and paused before swallowing the title that had just reached her mouth. She carefully glanced at the dignified and cold girl sitting on the sofa, with a simple white shirt tightly attached to her waistline, a narrow waist that didn't fit into her grip, the hem tucked into her black A-line skirt, the cuffs rolled up, revealing her slender white forearms, and her whole body exuded a clear and refined temperament, free from dust and dirt. The girl didn't care about her deliberate address and reached out to take the teacup, saying thank you. The servant looked at her in surprise and then turned to the quiet but slightly reserved girl sitting opposite her, who was the third miss she had been calling for over a decade. Unfortunately, she is just an adopted daughter. Now that the true third miss of the Gu family has returned, I don't know how she should handle herself. The servant sighed in his heart and shook his head as he retreated. In the kitchen, several maids hid in a place whispering quietly. Who would have thought that just after returning from vacation, they could come across such a big show from a wealthy family? Miss San is very nice, but unfortunately she is an adopted daughter. The real daughter of the Gu family has returned, so she probably needs to make way. No, I don't think so. I see that the old man and the old lady usually love Miss San very much. Even if it's just an adopted daughter, how could there be no relationship after all these years? It's actually Miss Gu who just arrived for the first time. Not to mention that, have you heard about it? The nights have been rough lately, and there have suddenly been many wandering monsters in the suburbs. The sound of discussion in the corner did not reach the living room. The atmosphere remained silent, filled with embarrassment. Gu Tingyu sat awkwardly, his hands nervously placed on his legs, and his heart was filled with agony. She secretly glanced at the girl with a stunning appearance across from her, flipping through the magazine with her head down, relaxed and composed. There is no sense of awkwardness as a guest. On the other hand, as someone who treats guests, she is extremely restrained. It's not that she doesn't know how to get along with people, it's just that this person's identity makes her feel a bit awkward. A adopted daughter of the Gu family, a true daughter of the Gu family. In the eyes of everyone in the Beijing area, as long as they stand in one place, they are like thunder and earth fire, standing at odds with each other. How could we sit together like this now, with a strange sense of harmony? Is there anything on my face? A cold and soothing voice suddenly entered her ears. Gu Tingyu was so shocked that he instinctively straightened his waist, as if he had been suddenly called out in class, and said in confusion, "Ah." Gu Yanwan raised his eyebrows. Gu Tingyu completely regained his senses and realized that he had been staring at someone else's face unconsciously just now. No. She wanted to cover her face and run away. It's too embarrassing. Gu Yanwan watched as the girl's face slowly turned red, so shy that she couldn't lift her head and the corners of her mouth involuntarily curved. The slender jade-like hand picked up the teacup and took a sip. The blue-white porcelain and fair fingers complemented each other, making it even more stunning. This adopted daughter is not as scheming as rumored. Gu Tingyu tried hard to cheer himself up, but he couldn't be ashamed. She straightened up, puffed up her breath, and tentatively called out, "Sister." The confidence is still insufficient. She was unaware of Gu Yanwan's attitude towards her adopted daughter. Gu Yanwan let out a faint without any emotion. Gu Tingyu felt that she couldn't see through. But no matter how it is said, it is oneself who has occupied their own identity for nearly 20 years. No one will have a favorable impression, will they? But she has never shown any extreme emotions since entering the door just now, quiet like a stranger. That. Gu Tingyu tried to find a topic to make the atmosphere less stagnant. Grandpa and Dad are going to the hospital to pick up Grandma, which is likely to take a long time. A month ago, the elderly man from the Gu family was admitted to the central hospital due to an emergency. At that time, there was a lot of buzz and excitement, and he almost managed to suppress it. It was only then that they found out that when Mrs. Gu was working in D-City, she had found her lost granddaughter over 20 years ago. No one can believe that there is such a coincidence in the world. But DNA identification is personally supervised by the Gu family and cannot be made wrong. Gu Yanwan's identity is completely determined. This news has blown the entire capital upside down. No one expected that after more than 20 years, a true daughter would suddenly emerge from the Gu family. Various media outlets rushed to the hospital frantically, trying to extract first-hand news from Mrs. Gu. Unexpectedly, Mrs. Gu directly announced Gu Yanwan's identity and said that she would soon be taken back to her home. Her move directly caused a lot of trouble among the people in the second and third rooms of the Gu family. It wasn't until a week ago that they stopped each other. Unexpectedly, before it had subsided for long, the protagonist, who was at the center of the public opinion vortex, directly killed the door. She also had a face-to-face encounter with her adopted daughter, who was reported by gossip media to have ulterior motives and wanted to cause a big battle for the wealthy. Gu Tingyu feels like crying without tears. Although the old lady had ordered someone to prepare a room and be ready to welcome her arrival at any time since the official announcement of Gu Yanwan's identity a month ago. But there was no news from Gu Yanwan, and just when everyone thought she didn't want to look back at home, she suddenly appeared. What's going on here? Gu Yanwan put down the magazine in her hand and looked up at her with a calm expression. I know. She has been communicating with Mrs. Gu about the news. Gu Tingyu's prepared words choked up in her throat. How should she answer this? She is a bit crazy. How come this new sister is so difficult to get along with? She said awkwardly, then you have tea first, don't be constrained, let's wait slowly together. Gu Yanwan said, Gu Tingyu said, What seems more restrained is herself. After an unknown amount of time, a sound finally came from the entrance. A group of people slowly entered the living room, and the one in the middle was dressed in a light blue qipao, with a sickly expression on his face. However, although he was old, his body was full of elegance and composure after years of accumulation. Time never beats beauty. Despite being seriously ill, Rao still hasn't washed away her aura. It's Mrs. Gu. Beside her stood an elderly man with white hair, spirited and solemn, exuding a natural aura. He was wearing a black long coat, holding a cane in his hand, while the other hand carefully supported Mrs. Gu. Mr. Gu, the head of the Gu family, is credited with achieving the status that today's wealthy families cannot match. I heard that this person had exceptional skills when he was young, and acted with solemnity, ruthlessness, and perseverance. Many influential figures fell into his hands. As he grew older, he restrained his temperament and, after the baptism of time, became tolerant and kind. Gu Yanwan put down the magazine and got up. The wrinkles on her shirt at the waist were flattened with her movements, making her waist even thinner and her figure more graceful. Gu Tingyu followed her closely and stood up, his gaze involuntarily shifting downwards, landing on her waist. He then lowered his head to look at himself, his heart immediately filled with feelings of inferiority. Face, incomparable; temperament, incomparable; physique, even more incomparable. Really, I want to cry. Gu Yanwan did not notice her gradually melancholic gaze. Her cold eyes looked around the crowd and eventually fell on Mrs. Gu, with a faint smile on her lips as she shouted, "Grandma." Mrs. Gu was pleasantly surprised and said, "It's too late." Mrs. Gu's reaction instantly caught everyone's attention. For a moment, several lines of sight fell on her, either exploring or scrutinizing, mixed with a hint of hostility. Gu Yanwan's expression remained unchanged, standing quietly in place, allowing these gazes to scrutinize her. Mrs. Gu was so happy that she shook off the person who was supporting her and walked directly to Gu Yanwan. She picked up her hand and said, "I've waited for you. How did you come?" "Good night." Gu Yan obediently let her hold hands and replied, "There's something that's taking up time." She glanced at Mrs. Gu and asked, "How are you?" "I didn't realize it just now, but as she approached, I realized that Mrs. Gu's illness on her face was deeper than when she was in D-City. It seems that even if she returned to the capital, her condition still hasn't improved." Mrs. Gu smiled kindly and said, it's okay, I'm fine." After speaking, she turned around and waved at the entrance, saying, "Lin Bai, Ji Wei, what are you still waiting for? Come over quickly." The two figures that had been frozen since just now finally took action. Gu Yanwan raised his eyes, and the two of them hesitated to approach, their expressions quite cautious, afraid to approach. The couple looked at their long-lost biological daughter in close proximity, with a dreamlike unreality, and their eyes turned red together. Lu Jiwei was dressed in a white women's suit, concise and elegant, exuding an elite demeanor. However, when she saw Gu Yanwan, she choked up. "You, me, I." Before the complete words could be spoken, tears had already fallen. Normally, she was swift and resolute, calm when things changed. Today, she couldn't hold her breath and cried silently, ignoring her image. She turned around and buried herself in Gu Linbai's arms. Gu Linbai's face was haggard, and his white coat also had many wrinkles, which was very different from his usual elegant demeanor. Recently, Lady Gu was seriously ill, and he had hardly closed his eyes. When he encountered Gu Yanwan, his emotions fluctuated too much and he could hardly bear it. He hugged his wife's shoulder and his voice trembled slightly. "You," he said. "I didn't know what to say. Although they are blood relatives, they are now like strangers." The atmosphere fell silent for an instant. At this moment, Mr. Gu suddenly stepped forward and patted Gu Linbai's shoulder. He then turned his head to look at Gu Yanwan, his gaze slightly heavy, and his tone serious. "What's your name?" Gu Yanwan looked up and obediently replied, "Gu Yanwan." Mr. Gu nodded, his serious expression gradually fading away, and his gaze towards her became kind and kind. "Not bad, calm and composed. This is still the first young man not to be scared by his stern face." He coughed lightly and spoke in a gentle tone, "Your parents are a bit excited to see you, don't think too much." Gu Yan nodded late and didn't say anything. Mrs. Gu stood aside, thinking she wasn't used to the situation, and said, "Late at night, let your parents take you to see the room." It was all carefully arranged by them, and I don't know if you like it or not. In fact, she is also trying to help the Gu Linbai couple cultivate more feelings with Gu Yanwan. Gu Yanwan saw Mrs. Gu's careful plan and did not object, agreeing. Lu Jiwei had already sorted out her emotions and wiped away her tears, but her voice still trembled and she said, "Let's go. It's late." She obviously doesn't know how to address her yet. The mother and daughter went upstairs in front of everyone's eyes, and Gu Linbai followed behind, carrying Gu Yanwan's suitcase. The living room quieted down again. At this moment, everyone who had been silent and watching the play could no longer resist. Gu Jiangxue glanced at Lady Gu and sneered softly, "Isn't she just a wild girl from the countryside? The battle is so big." Upon hearing this, her mother Duanshuman gave her a glance, indicating that she should not speak recklessly. Gu Jiangxue snorted coldly and ignored her. She turned her head to look at Gu Yingmeng and asked, "Hey. Do you think so?" Gu Yingmeng lowered her eyes, avoided her gaze, and dared not answer. "Cut, useless thing." Gu Jiangxue mocked Gu Yingmeng's cowardly nature in her heart and turned to talk to Gu Tingyu. "Tingyu, I don't think you, as a sister, can compete with you. You're just a bumpkin." Compared to Gu Yanwan, who only arrived at the Gu family today, Gu Jiangxue is obviously closer to Gu Tingyu, and even though she usually doesn't appreciate her status as an adopted daughter. But at least Gu Tingyu also bears the name of the daughter of the Gu family, and is still a superpower. Regardless of which family, the existence of a superpower is definitely a capital worth showing off. And Gu Yanwan is just a wild girl from the countryside. It would be good not to tarnish the facade of the Gu family, let alone bring glory to the family. Gu Tingyu frowned in displeasure. Since the news of Gu Yanwan being the true daughter of the Gu family spread, there have been people around her constantly hinting at her, both openly and secretly. Gu Yanwan's return to the Gu family is to compete with you for family property and love, as if everyone naturally placed her in opposition to Gu Yanwan. No one has ever asked her for her own opinion. Gu Tingyu snorted lightly, "I have no intention of arguing either." Gu Jiangxue looked at her incredulously and said, "Are you crazy?" She knows that this adopted daughter has always had a gentle personality and doesn't like to argue with people in her daily life. But at such times, there is no dispute. If Gu Yanwan is allowed to gain power, can she still accommodate an adopted daughter in the future? "You're really brainless." Gu Tingyu tugged at the corners of her mouth, ignoring her, and went straight upstairs. She argued for a fart. Everything she enjoys, her status as the daughter of the Gu family, the favor of the Gu family, and her usually prosperous life, was originally meant to be enjoyed at the Gu banquet, and it is only natural for her to return it to the family. She didn't have the leisurely attitude of being a malicious supporting actress to provoke disputes in a wealthy family, and in the end, she let outsiders watch the excitement. Gu Jiangxue stomped her feet angrily behind her. "This mud that can't support the wall. Dear children, I'm back. New book, please support me a lot." End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Heart-to-Heart Talks and Mysterious Transactions. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 2. Heart-to-Heart Talks and Mysterious Transactions. Gu Jiangxue saw Gu Tingyu's stubbornness, and a wave of anger surged in her heart. Looking not far away, she was full of thoughts about Gu Yanwan and completely forgot about her, Mrs. Gu. She bit her lower lip in injustice. Why? When Mrs. Gu was seriously ill, she often visited and asked for warmth and comfort, but in the end, she couldn't compare to an outsider who had just arrived. Gu Jiangxue felt more and more unfair as she thought about it. She pulled Duanshuman and said, "Mom. Let's go home." Duanshuman didn't know what his daughter was getting angry about, so he immediately stopped her and scolded, "What kind of mischievous behavior are you playing with? Your grandmother just arrived home, why are you leaving?" Gu Jiangxue angrily said, "Anyway, Grandma only has that Gu Yanwan in her heart. What's bothering me to stay here?" "Nonsense. Mom. Shut up." Duan Shuman shouted softly. She carefully glanced at Lady Gu's direction and found him chatting with him. She pulled Gu Jiangxue aside, avoiding Gu Yingmeng, and whispered to her, "I warn you not to be petty. Your father won't be able to come back from another city. Before leaving, he specifically instructed me not to cause trouble during this period. Their affairs have nothing to do with us, and we are not allowed to make Lady Gu unhappy. Her daughter has always been stubborn and unruly, with a hot temper. She loves to cause trouble for the couple and is particularly difficult to manage." Gu Jiangxue complained defiantly, "I just hate that Gu Yanwan. Why is it that when she comes, Grandma only cares about her? Even though you've been with her in the hospital for so long, Mom." "Enough, shut up." Duan Shuman's face completely darkened. When will this dead girl understand? Gu Yanwan was personally recognized by the old lady, and it is only natural for her to be favored. Can you be more open-minded and not easily jealous of others? This child is really hard to pick up. Even if her granddaughter has just been recognized from the countryside and has been pampered for a few days, what will happen? After a while, the freshness will naturally improve. Even if the old lady likes it, she won't like it for a few days. Why is she in a hurry? Gu Jiangxue was preaching and felt depressed, hanging her head in silence. Second floor. Lu Jiwei led Gu Yanwan to her room and introduced her along the way, saying, "The first master bedroom belongs to your grandparents, and the one next to us is our room. Tingyu and Nanqing live next door to you. If you have anything to do, you can talk to them." Gu Nanqing, 17 years old this year, is a senior high school student at Imperial University affiliated middle school. He is skilled in fighting and is a school bully. Gu Yanwan listened attentively, recalling information about Gu Nanqing in her mind. That. Lu Jiwei's expression was slightly reserved. "Can I call you late?" Gu Yan nodded later. Lu Jiwei pushed aside the bedroom on the right and looked back at Gu Yanwan's expression, pondering, "Evening, we don't know your preferences either, but I heard from the old lady that you probably don't like too complicated decorations, so it's a bit monotonous. If you don't like it, we can change it immediately." Gu Yanwan followed her into the door and looked around. The room is decorated in a very simple and elegant manner, without any pink or fancy decorations. The furnishings are simple yet highly meaningful, and the scenery outside the window is breathtaking and pleasing to the eye. "I really like it, thank you," she said with a slight smile on her lips and a hint of genuine emotion in her eyes. Lu Jiwei also breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Gu Yanwan with gentle indulgence, saying, "That's good." They also put a lot of effort into decorating the room, fearing that it might not suit the daughter's preferences. Thinking about this, Lu Jiwei looked at Gu Yanwan's back with relief. He didn't expect that nearly 20 years had passed, and her daughter had already grown up so gracefully, while her biological mother had not fulfilled any responsibility. It's really, not competent. When Mrs. Gu told them about Gu Yanwan, her first reaction was not to believe it. "I can't believe it. How can I believe it?" After searching for almost 20 years without any news, the results suddenly appeared. Normal people may also doubt the authenticity. The results of parent-child identification will never deceive people. Perhaps God blessed them and returned their daughter when they found out that they were suffering from missing her. Gu Linbai brought in Gu Yanwan's suitcase, and the black body of the suitcase lay on the ground, making a dull sound as if it contained something heavy. His gaze paused, wondering what kind of luggage he had with him at night. However, this is her privacy, and even if Gu Linbai was curious, he wouldn't ask. "I'll do it." Gu Yanwan saw that Gu Linbai was struggling with his suitcase for so long, so he had to go and pick it up himself. He was so scared that Gu Linbai quickly stepped back and waved his hand, "No, no, no, let me do it. This box is quite heavy." Unexpectedly, Gu Yanwan ignored his words and grabbed the lever of the suitcase. With a gentle lift of her fair and slender hand, she effortlessly picked up the black suitcase that even adults, Gu Linbai, found somewhat difficult. Gu Linbai was extremely shocked. He glanced at her hand and then at his own palm, his expression somewhat skeptical of life. Are you really not good at middle age? Surprisingly, her strength is even smaller than that of a little girl under 20. Watching Gu Yanwan effortlessly carry the suitcase to the bedside and stuff it under the bed, both the couple were shocked and froze in place. For a long time, Lu Jiwei realized his mistake, coughed lightly, and turned his head to glare at his useless husband in anger. I can't even catch up with my daughter. Waste husband Gu Linbai. That box is really heavy. Unfortunately, Lu Jiwei didn't have time to pay attention to Gu Linbai's grievances and depression. He stepped forward and took Gu Yanwan's hand to sit by the bed, and the mother and daughter started chatting. Wan, how have you been these years? She looked affectionately at Gu Yanwan's exquisite and beautiful face, feeling that this child had really suffered in recent years. Gu Yanwan felt amused in her heart. Does she seem to have suffered like this? She shook her head and said, it's pretty good, my foster parents are very kind to me. Do your foster parents know about you? Lu Jiwei frowned. If the late adoptive parents knew that their daughter, who had been raised for almost 20 years, would be taken away by the Gu family in the blink of an eye, they would probably be very sad. I told them, they are very open-minded, knowing that I have found my own background, and they are all happy for me. That's good. Gu Linbai stood aside, watching as the mother and daughter communicated, and suddenly asked, Wan, according to your grandmother, did you meet in D City? Gu Yanwan let out a sigh, lowered her eyes, and said the prepared words, my grandmother and I had a chance encounter. The first time we met, she said I looked very similar to you. Later, when she learned about my background, she became even more suspicious and went for a paternity test. Gu Linbai did not have any doubts, and Mrs. Gu had already told him about this. He only asked symbolically once. It's not just Lu Jiwei, even him. When he looked at the paternity test report of himself and Gu Yanwan, he was also confused for a long time and still feels a bit unreal to this day. After Gu Yanwan went missing, they went crazy and searched every corner of the capital without any results. Later, he spread his eyeliner to the whole country, and used his family's power to search for them for so many years, but still there was no news. After nearly 20 years of hard searching, he was unexpectedly met by Mrs. Gu in D City. To be honest, he still has doubts about Gu Yanwan to this day. It's not about her identity, but rather the timing of her appearance. It's a bit too coincidental. But now is not the time to say these things. I have wronged you for these years. It's too late. Don't worry, since you've come back, you deserve nothing less. We will double the compensation for you. Gu Linbai breathed a sigh of relief and looked seriously at Gu Yanwan. In addition, there is also the matter of listening to the rain. After you were lost, your mother suffered a severe breakdown and had mental health problems. In order to comfort her, we adopted a girl about your age. Don't worry, listening to the rain is well behaved and won't have any ulterior motives towards you. If she really does something wrong to you, I will personally take care of her. Lu Jiwei also agreed on the side, that's right, Wan. I know, before you came, you might have heard a lot of rumors and gossip in the capital, but Mom wants to say, you are our daughter, and we love you very much. But Ting Yu is the same. Over the years, we have always treated her like our biological daughter. Can you try to get along well with her? She carefully watched Gu Yanwan's expression, feeling very conflicted in her heart. She knew that Gu Yanwan would definitely have a grudge against Gu Tingyu because it was like a stunt double. No one who has just found their background will easily accept that their biological parents have adopted an adopted daughter to replace them. That would be a thorn in my heart. To be fair, Gu Tingyu and their relationship is also very deep. If it's not that being biological is better than being biological, how can she suddenly give up? Looking at the hesitant expressions of Lu Jiwei and Gu Linbai, Gu Yanwan smiled calmly and said, I know, it's okay, Gu Tingyu. She carefully recalled the scene of them sitting opposite each other in the hall just now, Gu Tingyu feeling cramped and a bit amused. She's quite interesting, she said. Although we haven't been together for a long time, it's clear that the adopted daughter doesn't seem to have any ulterior motives, and as long as we don't provoke her, she's willing to coexist peacefully. Really? Lu Jiwei and Gu Linbai were both surprised, and a smile appeared on their faces, while also feeling very pleased. Wanwan is really sensible. So they can temporarily rest assured. The three of them chatted for a while longer, during which Gu Linbai left to remind Mrs. Gu to take medicine, leaving only Lu Jiwei to chat with her. The mother and daughter talked a lot, and Lu Jiwei was no longer as reserved and at a loss as she had initially been. She could see that Gu Yanwan was taught very well. Her transparent and elegant temperament and polite words were simply superior to those wealthy families in the capital. Lu Jiwei's lips never fell, and he wished he could chat with Gu Yanwan all night. At this moment, the servant came up and knocked on the door, saying that Mrs. Gu had something to ask her for. I'll go down first, late at night. You can rest well. Lu Jiwei threw down a sentence and went downstairs. As soon as the door closed, the bedroom instantly quieted down. Gu Yanwan took a deep breath and got up to the table to pour himself a glass of water, moistening his slightly dry throat. She hasn't said much for a few days this month. My eyes narrowed slightly, looking towards the direction of the door. My slender fingers curled up and rhythmically tapped on the table. However, I seem to have forgotten something. Gu Yanwan stayed in place for a long time when suddenly a white light flashed in her mind. Immediately, she put down her cup and hurriedly walked to the bedside, dragging out the black suitcase and opening it, taking out the contents inside. Black laptop. A few pieces of clothing. And also, several transparent large glass containers. It contains 2/3 of the unidentified liquid, which turns slightly green under natural light. The liquid is filled with unidentified blocky objects resembling biological soft tissue. Gu Yanwan neatly arranged these containers on the ground, in strange shapes and densely packed, making people's scalp tingle and terrifying. But she was used to it, her face remained unchanged, and even enjoyed her work for a while with a leisurely expression. Then, she picked up the computer that was placed aside and sat cross-legged on the bed casually. She turned on her computer and logged into a website. A faint blue window popped up on the screen, flickering for about a minute before Gu Yanwan skillfully typed the password. The screen instantly turned snow-white, and then 2 capitalized black letters appeared before my eyes. YJ. Chinese name secret website. The world's largest intelligence website. Moreover, the threshold for user groups is particularly high, and only experts and leaders in various fields are eligible to enter the secret website. Because the secret website also has a very vivid nickname. The Gathering Place of Great Gods. Gu Yanwan logged into the manager's backend directly and found that private messages were overflowing. She didn't even glance at it and just clicked to delete it. Then open a person's private message chat box. Why, at Blood Fox, how did you consider the conditions mentioned last time? There is almost a second response over there. Blood Fox. Immortal. At why? Blood Fox. Just a joke, but if you take 3 low-level crystal core veins and want to buy me 1 military line, no matter what you think, it's my fault. Gu Yanwan chuckled lightly. Why, 1 sentence, agree or disagree. This time, they almost thought for almost a minute before returning. Blood Fox. Sure, but I need one more thing. Why, say it. Blood Fox. I heard you have a unique necklace in the world, the Morning Star. Gu Yan's eyes flickered slightly at night. This morning shining star is indeed the only one in the world. Because it's not an ordinary necklace, but a high-end crystal core. The advanced crystal nucleus in this world can be encountered but not sought after, and who would be a spendthrift to use it as a necklace? Except for her. This person is about to speak with a morning star, so he's not afraid of flashing his tongue. Gu Yanwan squinted her eyes and pondered for a moment. Why, line? Why, what do you want it for? Blood fox. Send someone for self-defense. Gu Yanwan. A priceless advanced crystal core is used for self-defense. Undoubtedly, he is a famous and unprofitable arms dealer in M country. Why, transaction. Advanced crystal core can be delivered as soon as you say, it's too late. You're also quite a loser. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. The fifth master of the Gu family, clear and exquisite, with unparalleled elegance and splendor. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 3. The fifth master of the Gu family, clear and exquisite, with unparalleled elegance and splendor. At this moment, the servant knocked on the door. Gu Yanwan's eyes flickered as he quickly packed up the scattered bottles and jars on the ground, put them in a luggage box, and stuffed them back under the bed. The door was pushed open, and the servant came in carrying a plate of tea and snacks. Gu Yanwan was leaning against the bedside reading a magazine. Miss San, the old lady said, we have prepared a welcoming banquet for you tonight. Gu Yanwan let out a faint sigh. The servant respectfully put down the tea and withdrew. The room quieted down again. Gu Yanwan put down the magazine, narrowed her eyes, and a deep meaning flashed through her eyes. Is it a family banquet? At this moment, somewhere in the capital, a black luxury car was parked on the roadside, low-key and luxurious, unable to see the people inside, only knowing that it was either rich or expensive. Suddenly, the car door was opened, and a man in a deep red suit got on the passenger seat. He handed the exquisitely packaged tea set to the back and joked, "Brother Wu, are you sure your old lady will like this?" In his impression, Mrs. Gu never drinks tea. There was a man sitting in the back seat, holding a string of white jade Buddha beads in his hand. His temperament was clear, gentle, and his well-defined fingers were clasped one by one. His eyes were slightly closed, as if he was closing his eyes to recuperate. Upon hearing this, I looked up at him and saw that the light shining through the car window happened to fall on that face, completely devoid of dust and unparalleled in style. The fifth master of the Gu family, the adopted son of the Gu family, is extremely favored. He has been weak since childhood and has developed a detached and indifferent temperament. However, his methods are very similar to those of the young Mr. Gu, and no one in the capital dares to disrespect him. Gu Jizhou chuckled lightly, his voice deep and magnetic. I don't know, but she usually likes what I bought. The other party is speechless. You can rely on Madame Gu to spoil you and be reckless. Gu Jizhou closed his eyes again and ignored him. The car started, and the man in the passenger seat yawned in a tired tone. You said we stayed in L City for half a month, were too busy to touch the ground, and rushed back to the capital overnight just to see your niece. After speaking, he sneered lightly again, I don't know which kind of goods this time they are. There were also many people who pretended to be relatives before, but in the end, they were all exposed and kicked out. I don't know how long this can last. Gu Jizhou opened his eyes and paused while holding the white jade Buddha bead, saying, the old lady's eyesight is not wrong. So this time it's true. Well, maybe. Shen Su turned around and couldn't quite grasp his meaning. Don't be too afraid, fifth brother, what did you think? Gu Jizhou cast his gaze outside the window, his demeanor changing slightly, but still carrying an elusive sense of alienation. People are real, their purpose is unknown. So, that's why you asked Lao Lin to investigate her. Mrs. Gu is getting old and easily emotional. This time, she has just recovered from a serious illness. If something is really found, it cannot be directly pointed out to avoid stimulating her. Be prepared with both hands and be prepared for any risks. If people really have problems, Gu Jizhou's distant and indifferent eyes flashed a hint of ruthlessness. At this critical moment, it can only be blamed on her bad luck. Shen Su looked at Gu Jizhou's indifferent expression and knew that he might be holding back something bad. He sighed from the bottom of his heart and changed the topic, saying, "By the way, Brother 5, the number of people on the secret network chasing you has been increasing recently. I inquired and said that Administrator Y has issued a black reward order for you. The distribution of reward orders on the secret website is in order of white, yellow, red, and black, with black being the highest level, regardless of life or death, and with no time limit. There have only been 2 black bounty orders issued by secret websites in history, one for a heinous international criminal and the other for him. Gu Jizhou. Shen Su was somewhat gloating, regardless of the expression on his fifth brother's face, and continued, "The time it was released was half a month ago, when Big Brother Y claimed to see people alive and see bodies dead." At this point, he finally couldn't help but burst out laughing. "Brother Wu, you disappeared for 2 years without any news, and that ancestor probably has the heart to dig your grave." Speaking of her, Gu Jizhou raised his forehead with a headache-like expression, and his usually gentle face showed a hint of helplessness. He sighed and said, "She has always had a bad temper, and I'm afraid she's being rushed this time." "You deserve it. You've been hiding for 2 whole years. It's best if you pray not to meet Miss Wan, otherwise I'll really have to mourn for you." Gu Jizhou. Gu Jizhou slowly turned the white jade Buddha pearl in his hand, pondered for a while, and finally compromised. First, handle the current situation well. Then, he personally went to apologize and begged the little ancestor for forgiveness. During their conversation, the car had already entered the Gu family's old house, with deep trees and towering iron gates, exuding a majestic atmosphere of simplicity. Gu furniture has a history of over 100 years and a strong influence, which is not easily comparable to ordinary wealthy families. It has been in business for several generations, and in the generation of Mr. Gu, it has reached an unshakable position. After Mr. Gu retired, he handed over the Gu family to his adopted son, Gu Jizhou, to take care of. In his hands, the Gu family created a new brilliant myth and established a huge commercial empire spread all over the world. The car slowly came to a steady stop, and the servant waiting on one side stepped forward to open the door. Gu Jizhou slowly got out of the car, wearing a white silk shirt and black suit pants. His body was straight, his figure was slender, and his temperament was cold and refined, like a fairy and a god. Shen Su followed closely behind, wearing a deep red suit and meticulously groomed hair before going out. He was handsome and eye-catching, with a touch of yuppie, coquettish and seductive. Zhou, the butler, approached respectfully and said, "Fifth Lord, Shen Ershao." Shen Su replied with a playful smile, "Uncle Zhou, long time no see." Gu Jizhou nodded, didn't say a word, and walked forward without hesitation. Housekeeper Zhou has long been accustomed to following behind him proficiently. "The old man and the old lady have been waiting for you for a long time." 2 hours ago, in Gu's living room. "Gu Yanwan hasn't come down yet." Mrs. Gu smiled and said, "I've been staying in D City for a long time, so I might not be accustomed to this place. I'll go up and take a look." After speaking, she pretended to get up, and the old man Gu beside him quickly supported her thin and frail body, displeased and said, "What's wrong with my poor health?" Although the tone was solemn, both inside and outside the words were full of worries. Mrs. Gu took his hand away and patted it reassuringly, saying, "It's okay, just a few steps away, don't fuss." After speaking, he went upstairs alone. Everyone looked at Mrs. Gu's back with different eyes. Gu Jiangxue was extremely angry and said discontentedly, "She's too immature. Grandma's health is not good, and she still puts on airs and insists on taking care of her elderly family." Duan Shimun quickly grabbed her, but it was already too late. Mr. Gu turned his head and frowned, saying, Jiang Shui, don't speak recklessly. Mr. Gu's appearance was already dignified, especially with a straight face, not angry and self-imposing. Gu Jiangxue had always been most afraid of him, so she quickly hid behind Duan Shiman. Upstairs, Mr. Gu knocked on the door and heard a response inside. He then pushed the door open and entered. Gu Yanwan was tinkering with his laptop, thinking it was a servant knocking on the door. When he saw Mrs. Gu enter, he quickly got up and helped her sit down. "Why did you come up in person?" Mrs. Gu looked at her with a meaningful expression in her eyes. "Let me talk to you for a moment." Gu Yan turned around and locked the door, sitting in front of Mrs. Gu. Her expression was not as obedient and gentle as before, but instead became cold and unpredictable, as if she had changed her appearance. She lazily lifted her eyelids and said, "You tell me." Mrs. Gu was not annoyed by her appearance, as if she had become accustomed to it. She chatted with her intimately and said, "You came to the capital so late. I'm afraid you're not just delayed by things in D City, are you?" She had already guessed, and Gu Yanwan was too lazy to keep it from her. "I went to investigate the Gu family." Mrs. Gu showed such an expression as expected. She has been with Gu Yanwan for nearly a year, and she knows this child well. She never does anything unprepared, and today she handles the Gu family with ease, clearly prepared. "I think you have a cautious temperament, and it's not a big deal. There's just one thing, I'm worried about you." Mrs. Gu's tone became worried. Gu Yanwan looked up, unsure why. "What?" Mrs. Gu sighed as if hesitating to speak. Finally, she pondered, "I wasn't completely unaware of what you were investigating in D City before. I could guess your purpose of agreeing to go back home with me so readily. However, tonight, I would like to remind you that the depth of the capital is different from D City. You must be careful when you act. We are your family, and if anything happens to you, we will be very worried." This statement came from the bottom of her heart. She had been wanting to say it for a long time, but due to the lack of opportunity. Gu Yanwan could naturally hear the concern in these words, and remained silent for a long time. After a while, he said in a gentle tone, "I understand." Mrs. Gu had a smile on her face, but suddenly coughed a few times and gasped for breath. Although feeling uncomfortable and unable to breathe, he kept waving to Gu Yanwan to signal that he was okay. Gu Yanwan stood up in an instant, skillfully and gently patting her back to help her breathe, and then took out a few red capsules from her bag and handed them to her. Mrs. Gu took the medicine and swallowed the water handed over by her other hand. She waited for a while before stopping her cough. Gu Yanwan frowned and said, "Why is it still not working? I originally thought that the medical level in Beijing was higher than that in D City, and Gu Linbai was the biological son of Mrs. Gu. Perhaps returning to Beijing for treatment would be better, but to my surprise, the effect was not as good as in D City." Mrs. Gu sighed and said, "It's not that simple. Dr. Mu even said that my illness is difficult. Although Lin Bai has high medical skills, he is not a fairy. Besides her illness, even immortals cannot save her." She looked up at Gu Yanwan, with a hint of concern hidden in the child's indifferent and distant eyes. Mrs. Gu touched her hand and comforted, "I'm fine, don't worry." Gu Yanwan still frowned tightly. "It's safer to let Mu Feng come to the capital." Mrs. Gu talked to her for a while again, and then the two of them went downstairs together. In the living room, Gu Tingyu didn't know when he had also gone down. He was chatting with Gu Yingmeng, but when he saw her and Mrs. Gu going down, Gu Tingyu quickly ran over and helped her sit down on the sofa. Gu Yanwan ignored the others and sat quietly there, looking up at time and taking a light sip from his teacup. That person should be arriving soon. Suddenly, someone shouted, "Fifth Lord is back." Although Gu Jizhou is an adopted son, he was raised as an heir by Mr. Gu from a young age. He has a distant personality and strong means. In the Gu family, except for Mr. Gu, Mrs. Gu, and the Gu Linbai couple, everyone's attitude towards Gu Jizhou is more respectful than close. The atmosphere suddenly quieted down. Everyone's gaze converged towards the entrance, only to see a person slowly enter the living room, with an outstanding figure and refined demeanor, followed by a mischievous figure. It is truly Gu Jizhou and Shen Su. Gu Yanwan's lips slowly curved upwards, revealing a sincere and meaningful smile. Finally arrived. Uncle. Uncle. All the younger generation present stood up respectfully and respectfully greeted Gu Jizhou, with an extremely humble attitude. Even Duan Shiman stood up and shouted with an unnatural expression, "Fifth Lord." Mr. Gu handed over all of Gu's family to him. Even though he had been unconscious in a car accident for 2 years, Mr. Gu never had the intention of letting others take power, which shows how much he valued this adopted son. And Gu Jiangshue's father, Gu Linhong, and Gu Yingmeng's father, Gu Linyan, although they are the sons of Mr. Gu, they are not biological, but adopted. They have been raised under Mr. and Mrs. Gu since childhood, and their status has been very awkward for so many years. Although they are very dissatisfied with Mr. Gu's preference for Gu Jizhou, they have no right to comment. The relationship between the characters in the Gu family is very complex. During the investigation, it took some effort, but the final result really surprised her. Gu Yanwan stood up and slowly met the person's indifferent and distant eyes. 2 faces facing each other, 4 eyes facing each other. As expected, one unexpectedly. The male and female leads have finally met, it's really not easy. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Troubles, Gu Nanxing appears. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Troubles, Gu Nanxing appears. Shen Su, who followed behind him, had already lost his soul. Help! Is his eyes blind? How else would hallucinations occur? Who will tell him why the ancestor they just mentioned, who chased after the 5th brother all over the world, appeared here? Gu Jizhou's cold and indifferent face froze for the first time, looking in surprise at the girl standing in front of him with a gentle and harmless smile. That's the person he hid from for 2 whole years. Not seen in 2 years, she is even more outstanding than before, and her temperament has changed a lot, giving people a completely different feeling. Gu Jizhou squinted his eyes and paused, his hand holding the white jade Buddha bead. His expression instantly returned to normal, with a gentle smile in his eyes. He jokingly looked at Gu Yanwan and asked, "Is this my little niece?" "Hey!" Shen Su looked at Gu Jingzhou in shock, but he didn't react at all. "Is your mentality so stable? To listen to this tone is to pretend not to know." Gu Yanwan lowered her head and tidied up her cuffs, with a cold smile in her heart. "Okay." She stayed by to the end. Gu Yanwan lifted her head, still looking obedient and gentle, with a slight smile on her lips, and said, "First time meeting, Uncle." Shen Su had already been struck with lightning and petrified in place. What is this situation? No matter how calm Gu Jizhou was, he was choked by her nickname. His cold expression almost couldn't hold, and he forced a syllable out of his throat, In the past 2 years, he had thought about what it would be like to meet again, but this time it was really beyond his expectations. Mrs. Gu heard that Gu Jizhou had returned, so she hurriedly came out of the kitchen, only to see the 2 of them frozen in place, and the atmosphere was silent. "What's wrong with this?" Mrs. Gu asked. The 2 of them looked away, sorted out their emotions, and in the blink of an eye, the atmosphere returned to normal. Gu Jizhou smiled and said, "It's not much." "Xiao Wu, how did you arrive? Didn't the phone say you would be back in the morning?" Indeed, he arrived in the capital in the morning, but he also went to handle some matters. These naturally cannot be let Mrs. Gu know. Something has caused a delay. Mrs. Gu looked at him in surprise, then at Gu Yanwan and joked, "You 2 won't collude, will you? You use the same excuse." Gu Jizhou. Gu Yanwan. Shen Su stood behind them and silently roasted in his heart that the two people's bloody tacit understanding had not changed for so many years. I thought I could come to Gu's house with my fifth brother to watch a good show, but I was scared to death. This place is not suitable for prolonged stay. He said, Madam, I have successfully completed the task you assigned and safely escorted Brother Wu to his home. On this occasion, as an outsider, I won't disturb you. Goodbye for now. After speaking, he gave Gu Jizhou a glance and quickly ran away. Mrs. Gu looked at Shen Su's fiery back and muttered, Shen Er, what are you doing running so fast for? However, Shen Su has always been carefree, and she doesn't mind either. Xiao Wu, how have you been during your time in L City? Have you had no problems? Gu Jizhou was already weak. 2 years ago, he was in a car accident and unconscious. He just woke up a few months ago and insisted on working on Gu's affairs as soon as he woke up. He couldn't stop him at all. If it weren't for her emergency hospitalization this time, he wouldn't have known how long he would have stayed outside. Listening to Mrs. Gu's tone of anger, Gu Jizhou smiled helplessly and leaned forward to support her arm, asking in return, how did you mean to say that you're talking to me? If you fell ill, you wouldn't say it, and you kept it from me with the old man and the others. I'm not afraid you're worried. If you're working hard over there and have health problems again, what should you do? With just one patient in our Gu family, it's enough for your big brother to drink a pot. If you fall ill again, I'm afraid he'll go crazy. Mr. Gu has a total of 4 sons and 1 daughter, but only 2 of them are biological. As the eldest son of the Gu family, Gu Linbai has shouldered a heavy responsibility since childhood. As a mother, she has always felt sorry for him. When he gave up inheriting his family business and pursued his ideals to study medicine, she and Mr. Gu did not stop him, thinking not to put too much pressure on him. Who would have thought that in old age, it would actually add a burden to this son? Not to mention Gu Linbai, it's okay. With this mention, Gu Jizhou's face suddenly changed. He glanced at Gu Yanwan, who was sitting quietly and obediently on the side, feeling flustered. Her appearance completely disrupted his thoughts. Xiao Wu. Just as Gu Jizhou was in a daze, Mr. Gu and Gu Linbai came down from the 2nd floor. They had just gone to the study to talk about something. Have you finished everything in L City? Mr. Gu asked, his tone not as solemn as he had towards others just now, and he could be called kind. He has never treated Gu Jizhou differently from others. Gu Jizhou nodded and said, there is still some finishing work left to Gu Yang and his team. Mr. Gu nodded and didn't ask any more questions. Xiao Wu, work is important, and your health is also important. When you have time, go to the hospital and I will give you a check. Up, Gu Linbai said on the sidelines. Having experienced Mrs. Gu's situation, he is now highly nervous and afraid that something else will happen to Gu Jizhou. Okay, Gu Jizhou responded. Gu Yanwan listened to their conversation on the side, frowning slightly. How could you listen to their tone? Gu Jizhou seems to be dying soon. She looked up at Gu Jizhou again, her face even more stunning than 2 years ago, with deep contours, clear and distinct lines, clear and distant, and a slightly sickly pale and weak complexion. Gu Yanwan lowered her eyes, and a dark color flashed across the bottom of her eyes. Late or late? Gu Yanwan looked up and found that Lu Jiwei was calling her. What's wrong? Are you absent-minded? Lu Jiwei glanced at Gu Jizhou, whose demeanor was too indifferent and distant to be easy to get along with from afar. She asked slightly, are you nervous? Her words immediately caught everyone's attention. Under the gaze of others, Gu Yanwan slowly shook her head and denied, no. She looked up at Gu Jizhou with a smile on her lips. I just remembered a rumor I heard before coming to the capital, and now that I think about it, that rumor is true. Lu Jiwei said, what rumors? Gu Yan paused for a moment in the evening and said slowly, some people say that my uncle is unparalleled in style, addicted to countless things, and the dream lover of countless socialites in the capital. The pitch-black and clear eyes stared at Gu Jizhou, with a faint hint of humor and a faint chill. The atmosphere was as quiet as death. Gu Tingyu suddenly widened his eyes. This speech. How brave. Saying such things in front of the uncle would be too tall for someone else's grave. Cough. Lu Jiwei awkwardly cleared his throat and secretly glanced at Gu Jizhou. Seeing that the other person's expression remained unchanged, he let out a slight sigh of relief. Speaking too late is also too late. She smiled and shook her head. Gu Linbai on the side couldn't help but chuckle. This girl is really brave, even Xiao Wu's jokes dare to be made. Gu Jizhou sat casually on the single sofa, legs crossed, holding the string of white jade Buddha beads in his right hand. Upon hearing this, his well-defined fingers paused slightly and looked up at her. He pondered for a moment, smiled gently, and replied, "Thank you very much for your praise. Gu Yanwan. Everyone. The silent atmosphere now appeared somewhat eerie. Finally, Madame Gu cleared the situation and smiled, "All right, Xiao Wu, don't bully Wanwan." Watching their joyful scene, Gu Jiangxue watched with jealousy and resentment from the side. Unable to bear it any longer, she stood up and angrily left. Gu Yingmeng wanted to shout out to stop her, but she didn't dare to attract anyone's attention. Duan Shuman, in order to dislike Mrs. Gu, was helping in the kitchen at the moment. If something happened to Gu Jiangxue at this moment, she couldn't stop it. Gu Yingmeng bit her lower lip and lowered her eyes. For a long time, she took advantage of everyone's lack of attention and chased Gu Jiangxue out. Gu Jiangxue quickly walked into the yard, her face gloomy. She took out her phone and saw no one around paying attention. She whispered, "Hello. Did you find out what I asked you to check before?" "Don't worry, Jiang Shui. My uncle is in D-City, and I asked him to check. Gu Yanwan's foster parents' family is very poor, and she disappeared after graduating from junior high school. No one knows where she went. But what do you think a girl who graduated from junior high school can do? Anyway, it won't be a good thing." Gu Jiangxue listened with a sinister smile on her lips. She thought this Gu Yanwan was so pure, she turned out to be just a bumpkin from the countryside. When Gu Yingmeng caught up, she saw Gu Jiangxue hiding next to the fence in the flower garden. While listening to the phone, she was holding the flowers inside. They were raised by Mrs. Gu, with precious varieties and worth millions of dollars. They were carefully taken care of every day and even hired someone to take care of them. At this moment, he was held in his hand by Gu Jiangxue and ravaged, completely devastated, which is regrettable. She slowly approached and heard Gu Jiangxue say, "Help me contact a reliable marketing account." I'll send you the money back. Make sure to publicize everything about her. I don't think she has the face to rely on the Gu family." Gu Yingmeng's heart thumped as she knew she was going to die again, but she didn't dare to stop her. She approached and called out, "Sister." Gu Jiangxue was startled for a moment and looked at her with disgust in her eyes. "What are you doing with me? I'm worried about you." Worried about her doing something out of line. Gu Jiangxue snorted coldly, "Mind your own business. I just heard you." Gu Jiangxue suddenly turned around and glared at her, his tone even colder. "You said it's too much to meddle." However, Gu Yingmeng still had some concerns, but the next second, she looked behind Gu Jiangxue and suddenly widened her eyes. A black motorcycle appeared in her sight, with a deafening roar getting closer and closer, charging straight towards them. "This is the Gu family's old mansion." Gu Yingmeng was so scared that she couldn't speak and forced a voice from her throat. "Sister." Gu Jiangxue had already turned around and watched helplessly as a motorcycle collided with her, with no blood on her face and her legs weak. With the car right in front of them, the owner still had no intention of slowing down, as if he was going to run over them directly. "Don't." Gu Yingmeng closed her eyes and didn't dare to look, tightly gripping Gu Jiangxue's sleeve. Gu Jiangshue's heart pounded violently, and the deafening roar almost pressed against her ears. She suddenly closed her eyes and shouted desperately, "Gu Nanshang." The next second, the brakes sounded, and the motorcycle stopped steadily in front of the two of them. Gu Jiangxue slowly opened her eyes, and the car was only 1 centimeter away from her. If the brake slows down for a second, she will be completely gone. Gu Jiangxue breathed a sigh of relief, and a few drops of cold sweat slid down her pale face, causing her body to fall to the ground as if losing strength. Gu Yingmeng didn't feel well either, her face turned pale, but at least she persevered and stood in place. The young man stopped the car, with a straight and slender leg resting on the ground. He lifted his hand and took off his helmet. The silver-purple earrings were dazzling and eye-catching in the sunlight. Her short, milky gray hair was clean and neat, and her face was delicate. However, her eyes were filled with an indescribable sense of mischief and evil, and her lips were light, making her irritable and difficult to provoke. Gu Nansheng lowered his eyes and looked coldly at the two people who were almost paralyzed by fear. He tugged and said, "So it's you. I thought it was 2 roadblocks." Gu Jiangxue was just scared out of her wits. Now, full of anger, she stood up from the ground with difficulty and pointed at Gu Nansheng, cursing, "Gu Nansheng. Are you trying to kill someone? I'm your sister." She was so angry that her whole body was trembling. Gu Nansheng gave her a light glance, cold and evil, and Gu Jiangxue immediately withdrew her hand. "You're sneaking around in my territory, I thought you were car thieves." "You." Gu Jiangxue was about to counterattack, but was pulled by Gu Yingmeng, gesturing for her to look beside her. "Not bad, this is indeed Gu Nanshang's parking lot. Mr. Gu has always favored him and knows that he likes motorcycles. He specially opened up a corner of the flower garden as an exclusive parking lot for him." Gu Jiangxue bit her lower lip, her jealousy driving her crazy. But he dared not provoke Gu Nansheng. Without him, he is a person with a wicked and arrogant personality, with a thug like a bandit. He loves to fight people the most and no one in his family or peers dares to provoke him. Not to mention these 2 powerless girls. Starting from today, we will resume updating. As for Li Jiu's book, don't worry, I will finish it. I promise it won't end. I love you all. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Gu Family Banquet, Gift of Shares. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Gu Family Banquet, Gift of Shares. Gu Nansheng looked at the person who was still full of anger just now and remained silent. With a cold sneer in his heart, he crossed his long legs and got off the car in a graceful and neat manner, throwing the car key to the servant beside him. The servant took the car key and respectfully and skillfully parked the car. Gu Nansheng walked towards the two of them, approaching step by step with an imposing aura. The two of them involuntarily took a half step back. Gu Jiangxue shrank her neck and her voice trembled slightly. "What are you doing?" Gu Nansheng's eyes showed an undisguised irritability and coldness, forcing him to ask, "What's wrong? You don't want to settle accounts with me anymore." Even in the last second, it was still imposing. The two of them didn't speak. Gu Jiangxue clenched her fist, her nails sinking into her flesh, but she dared not choke. Because they can't afford to provoke. Upon seeing this, Gu Nansheng sneered and cursed in his heart, "You're a coward." At this moment, a black SUV drove into the yard, came to a steady stop, the car door opened, and a man in a black uniform got out of the car. Gu Nansheng's eyes suddenly lit up, and the fierce aura in his eyes dissipated instantly. "Big brother." He left the two sisters who were too frightened to speak, ran to the man in black, grabbed each other's shoulders, and asked, "How can you be willing to come back, you workaholic?" The person who came was Gu Tingyuan, the eldest son of Gu Linbai, and also the nominal elder brother of Gu Yanwan. Gu Tingyuan smiled gently and hugged his long unseen younger brother, saying, "Grandma is discharged from the hospital, and there is also a family banquet. If I don't come, it would be too outrageous. He glanced at Gu Jiangxue and the others not far away and whispered, "What's wrong?" Gu Nanqing said nonchalantly, "Two roadblocks are blocking my way." Gu Tingyuan knew his temperament and also knew that he had always looked down on Gu Jiangxue and Gu Yingmeng. He remained silent for a moment and lifted his foot to walk towards them. Compared to the unruly and difficult to deal with Gu Nanqing, Gu Tingyuan is usually generous and gentle, and handles things calmly. However, his work is special, and he carries a chilling feeling that makes them feel intimidated. Gu Tingyuan glanced at their pale faces and fully understood what had happened. His eyes flickered slightly and he said, "Nanqing is young and immature. As sisters, please bear with him more. What a young and immature age. It's clearly biased." Gu Jiangxue was extremely angry, but due to neither of these two people, she couldn't afford to provoke her. She forced herself to swallow her breath and forced out a smile, saying, "It's okay, I won't mind." Gu Tingyuan nodded and turned to wave to Gu Nanqing, saying, "Let's go and see the new members of the family together." Gu Nanqing said, "Okay." The two of them left, and Gu Jiangxue stared intently at their backs, as if trying to dig a hole in them. This family doesn't have a single good thing. Let's wait and see. Big brother, what are you doing with them? They usually bully the weak and fear the hard, they are both stupid and cowardly. I'm just scaring them, but nothing happened, Gu Nanqing asked. Gu Tingyuan frowned and glanced at him, "Most of the elders are here tonight, don't cause trouble." His temperament is favored by Mr. Gu and Mrs. Gu, and he behaves recklessly in front of his own family, not allowing outsiders to gossip. Gu Nanqing pursed his lips, not knowing how much he had heard. Oh. There was a lot of noise in the yard, and the people in the living room also heard some of it. Lu Jiwei supported his forehead and sighed helplessly, "This stinky kid, he's causing trouble all day." Gu Linbai also had a dark face. Only Mrs. Gu said happily, "It's okay, young man, you're full of energy." Everyone laughed awkwardly without revealing it. The reputation of Gu Nanqing, the notorious Demon King, is well known throughout the entire capital city. You dare say he is young and full of energy. Gu Tingyuan and Gu Nanqing walked in, looked around, called out one by one, and finally coincidentally turned their gaze to Gu Yanwan, carefully examining her. Gu Yanwan stood up and stared at their almost scrutinizing gaze, calmly greeting them, "Big brother, Nanqing." Gu Tingyuan squinted his eyes, not knowing what was on his mind. His heart relaxed, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He let out a sigh of relief. Gu Nanshan whistled at her and said, "It's our first time meeting, sister." The tone was full of teasing. Gu Linbai looked at him, who had been out of shape since entering the door, and suddenly became angry, "Speak up to me." Gu Nanqing finally put away his casual appearance and became a bit more serious. "All right, everyone is here. Let's start eating. Tingyuan and Nanqing, you two should change your clothes first." Gu Nanqing was wearing a tight racing suit, and he could tell at a glance what he had just done. The uniform on Gu Tingyuan's body, possibly due to a recent mission, had some stains on the cuffs of his shirt. Gu Yanwan's eyes flickered. "There is a slight smell of blood." She glanced up at Gu Tingyuan, who was the youngest and most talented captain in the history of the Cross-League Action Team. He had a calm and dignified personality, comprehensive actions, and strong strength, making him one of the trumps of the Cross-League. "Perhaps you can try starting from him." Gu Yanwan stood in place, his eyes drooping in contemplation. "What are you thinking?" At this moment, a deep and pleasant voice exploded in my ears, and a familiar yet unfamiliar aura gradually approached. Gu Yanwan suddenly regained consciousness and found that Gu Jizhou appeared next to her at an unknown time, and her expression immediately became cold. Gu Jizhou looked at her dangerous and warning eyes and chuckled lightly, "As for what?" Looking at the expression, the killing intent was very obvious. At the moment he saw her just now, he was indeed shocked. In addition to being shocked, there was some surprise, and in addition, there was some relief. She disappeared completely for 2 years, erasing all traces of past existence, and was the only one persistently searching for his whereabouts. He thought about what it would be like for them to meet again, but he didn't expect it to be so soon. Gu Jizhou deliberately lowered his voice while speaking, and everyone around him was busy with their own tasks, without anyone noticing them. Gu Yanwan's voice was cold and distant. "Sorry, uncle, we're not familiar." She left him with such a sentence and went straight to Lu Jiwei's side. "Gu Jizhou. It seems that I am angry and not easy to coax." Gu Wuye, who usually handles things with ease, made a mistake for the first time. "It's called a family banquet, but it's not very formal. It's just a family sitting together and having a meal." Mr. Gu helped Mrs. Gu sit down first, and she specifically asked Gu Yanwan to sit next to him. Seeing this, Gu Jiangxue was jealous but helpless. On Gu Yanwan's left side was Lady Gu, and on her right side was Lu Jiwei. When everyone sat down, she looked up and saw Gu Jizhou sitting lazily and casually across from her, smiling lightly at her. Her face was radiant, completely devoid of dust. Gu Yanwan turned his head away directly and didn't look at him. After seeing everyone seated, Mrs. Gu cleared her throat and said, "Before we eat, I want to announce something to everyone." She glanced at Gu Yanwan and said with a smile, "I have decided to give her 11% of the shares in Gu's company and 2 properties under my name as a gift." This statement startled everyone. "What?" Among them, Gu Jiangxue had the greatest reaction and instinctively got up. Due to being too anxious, the wine glass at hand was thrown to the ground, and the red wine in the glass spilled on the snow-white carpet, staining it red. The servant quickly stepped forward to tidy up. Mrs. Gu frowned and looked at her displeasedly. Duan Shimon's heart tightened and he secretly said that it was not good. He quickly pulled Gu Jiangxue and wanted her to sit down quickly. At this moment, Gu Jiangxue's jealousy in her heart had reached its peak, and her mind was buzzing. She didn't care about anything else and loudly questioned, "Why? She's just a rural woman. Why can she own shares in the Gu family?" End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Gu Jiangxue punished. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Gu Jiangxue punished. Mrs. Gu's face darkened and she angrily rebuked, "Gu Jiangxue. What are you talking about? Who is a rural woman?" Despite not recovering from her serious illness, her voice lacked confidence, but her anger was evident in her tone. Mrs. Gu is usually very gentle and almost never turns against the younger generation. This is the first time she has scolded the younger generation in front of everyone. Gu Jiangxue's face turned white with just a brush. She glanced at Gu Yanwan's jealous face, bit her lower lip, and finally spat out everything she wanted to say today. Originally, even if she was uncle's daughter, raised in the countryside for so many years, ignorant and uneducated, how could she have owned Gu's shares as soon as she appeared? The sound of these words became quieter and quieter, especially when she saw that Mrs. Gu's face had deteriorated to the extreme. A wave of panic rose in her heart. The quiet and frightening atmosphere on the dining table. Everyone reacted differently, and the only one who remained unaffected was Gu Yanwan. She listened to Gu Jiangxue's complaints with a calm expression and no signs of anger. But Mrs. Gu is different. She usually dotes on Gu Jiangxue, her granddaughter, but she didn't expect her to dare to make such remarks in public, which made her sad and disappointed. Jiang Shui. Mrs. Gu's tone calmed down, no different from usual, but it made Gu Jiangxue even more flustered. "So, you have such a big opinion about Wanwan." Her gaze swept over Duan Shimon, who was sitting restlessly next to Gu Jiangxue, and her gaze suddenly became sharp. She asked, "I want to know, who told you these words?" Although it is an interrogative sentence, its directionality is too strong, almost indicating that someone has instigated it. Duan Shiman quickly denied with a flustered expression, "No, it's not me. Madam, Jiang Shui is young and not sensible. She speaks without restraint. Don't argue with her, as she may be mentally ill." Not sensible. Mrs. Gu sneered, second wife, does Jiang Shui seem to be older than one? Duan Shiman remained silent and almost gritted his back teeth. Gu Jiangshui, this restless thing. Before her father went on a business trip, he reminded her not to cause trouble, but who knew that after a long day of rest, she ended up holding back a lot. Thinking about carefully taking care of Mrs. Gu in the past few months, and going to the hospital to serve her every day, all the good feelings she finally gained were ruined by her. Pa! Mrs. Gu heavily placed her chopsticks on the table, which startled the mother and daughter. I don't care what you think, old lady. I'll leave my words here today. Wan is the precious granddaughter I personally found, the daughter of my family. She deserves everything you give her, it's not your turn to chew your tongue here. After speaking for a long time, coupled with her emotional excitement, Mrs. Gu couldn't help but cough. Upon seeing this, Mr. Gu's expression suddenly changed. He quickly stepped forward to support Mrs. Gu, carefully patting her back and looking at Gu Jiangshui with displeased eyes. Mr. Gu is usually not good at speaking, but he is the most dignified presence of the Gu family. He is solemn and rigid. Except for Gu Jizhou, almost everyone present has been taught a lesson by his ruler, so the younger generation of the Gu family has a great psychological shadow over him. At this moment, his face sank, and Gu Jiangshui's face suddenly turned completely devoid of blood. Done. These two words flashed through her mind in an instant. As expected, in the next second, Mr. Gu, who was only good at speaking, said in a deep voice, Gu Jiangshui, disrespectful to elders, speaks ill of himself, kneels in the temple for an hour. Gu Jiangshui's figure swayed, almost unable to stand steadily, and her mind was dizzy. Kneeling in the ancestral hall. This is a nightmare-like punishment method for the Gu family. Kneeling on the cold temple tiles for an hour, how could Gu Jiangshui, who has always been pampered, withstand it? I'm afraid my legs will be weak. Duan Shiman couldn't bear to believe that it was his own biological daughter and pleaded, old man, Jiang Shui has always been weak. Kneeling for an hour will definitely take her to the hospital, this. Mr. Gu remained indifferent and still gave Mrs. Gu some peace of mind. Duan Shiman gritted his teeth and turned his gaze to Gu Yanwan, saying, Yanwan, your sister usually has a broken mouth and doesn't speak properly. Aunt Air apologizes to you on her behalf. Don't argue with her, okay? Hearing this, Gu Nanxing suddenly smiled and murmured to Gu Tinyuan. Our second aunt is really flexible and a character. Gu Tinyuan remained silent, but his thoughts were the same as those of Gu Nanxing. As an elder, apologizing to a younger generation at the Gu family's dinner table without hesitation is indeed a matter of flexibility. A good move is to make progress by retreating. Words are full of apologies, but every word is forcing Gu Yanwan. If Gu Yanwan refuses to forgive, it is publicly refuting the face of the elders. Gu Yanwan lowered her eyes, unable to see clearly and remained silent. The atmosphere was particularly quiet for a moment. Everyone's attention is focused on Gu Yanwan. Yiso Gu Jizhou, who had been quiet all along, suddenly called out to Su Man. Duan Shiman didn't know why, but he couldn't help but let out a thud in his heart. Gu Jizhou lowered his eyes and casually touched the white jade Buddha beads with his fingers. He spoke with a gentle expression, the rules at my second brother and sister-in-law's house are really good. The elders are sitting here, and she, as a younger generation, dares to show respect to the old lady in public. Under Duan Shiman's increasingly pale face, he slowly uttered the last sentence. You're really well-mannered. Just 5 words, hit the nail on the head. Completely convicted Gu Jiangshui. Forcing Gu Yanwan to submit. Gu Jizhou didn't show any signs on his face, but sneered inwardly. She also deserves it. Mr. Gu also put his chopsticks aside, losing patience. He glanced calmly at Duan Shuman and said, "Second wife, since you care so much about your daughter, why don't you go with her?" Duan Shuman's eyes darkened and he almost couldn't hold his expression. "No, Jiang Shui." She glanced at her mischievous daughter and gritted her teeth, saying cruelly, "She really deserves some lessons." Mom. Watching his mother also compromise, the last glimmer of hope in his heart was extinguished. Gu Jiangxue sat down in his seat, as if in mourning, afraid to say a word. Mr. Gu did not ask her to go to the ancestral hall immediately, presumably to save her some face and let her go after dinner. However, this meal was tasteless and particularly agonizing for Gu Jiangxue. She felt that everyone was mocking her for such a big scandal. And the root of all of this is because of her. Gu Yen. Late. You wait for me. Gu Yanwan noticed the strong hatred on Gu Jiangxue's body and tugged at the corners of her mouth, completely ignoring it. Mrs. Gu calmed down for a while, and finally calmed down. She looked at Gu Yan's calm and obedient appearance at night, without any reaction to Gu Jiangxue's almost harsh words, feeling a heart-wrenching pain. "Wan, these are gifts from Grandma to you. You keep them, they belong to you, and no one can take them away." Gu Yanwan looked up and sincerely said thank you. Mr. Gu watched as Mrs. Gu held Gu Yanwan's hand, his tone filled with heartache. After a moment of contemplation, he tried to make his voice appear calm and asked, "Wan, you're new to the capital. If you're not used to anything, just let me know." Gu Yanwan nodded. "That's right." Mr. Gu seemed to think of something. "Late at night, are you still at school? Listen to the rain in the Imperial University. How about I arrange you to study in the Imperial University? You sisters can also have a care." Gu Yanwan lowered her eyes and refused. "No need, Grandpa, I have already started working." As soon as these words were spoken, the scene fell silent for a moment. "Working?" Gu Jiangxue sneered in her heart. She just said this is just a bumpkin who didn't even get into college. How can she have the face to go out and say she's the daughter of the Gu family in the future? End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Learn to be good. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Learn to be good. Mr. Gu didn't expect to receive such an answer. He was a bit stunned and turned his head to look at Mrs. Gu. Seeing that the other party didn't show any signs of surprise, he regained his composure and coughed lightly, saying, "What job? Are you tired? Why don't I let your uncle arrange for you to work at the Gu family?" Gu Jiangxue suddenly widened her eyes. How is the reaction different from what she imagined? Gu Yanwan raised her eyes and met the gaze of Gu Jizhou, who was looking over. After a moment's pause, she refused, "No need." Mrs. Gu glanced at Mr. Gu and scolded, "You old man, you have your own business to attend to at night. Don't delay others." "No, I just want to make Wan feel more relaxed. At least after entering the Gu family, you can still take care of one or two, right? Wan, these years. You've really suffered." Lu Jiwei looked at Gu Yanwan with heartache, wondering how she had been living during their absence for the past 20 years. Her heart was filled with self-blame and regret. She had already come out to fight at a young age, and she couldn't even imagine the pain she had suffered. Gu Yanwan was taken aback for a moment, then pursed her lips and said, "It's okay." A hint of mockery flashed through Duan Shuman's eyes on the side, but his mouth remained calm and hypocritical, saying, "Sister-in-law, don't worry too much. It's great to have a stable job these days. Look at Ting Yuan, he works tirelessly every day, so parents have to worry so much." Gu Tingyuan paused his hand as he picked up the dishes, slowly put down his chopsticks, and looked at her with a heavy gaze. Duan Shuman's heart trembled slightly, and his voice immediately changed. "However, Tingyuan is also the most promising child in our family, and Tingyu. At such a young age, he is in the Emperor's power class, and he will definitely enter the Alien Alliance Bureau in the future. It's just an endless future. Sister-in-law, don't worry. Gu Tingyu couldn't eat the food that had just arrived at his mouth, and he sighed in his heart. Auntie, you really can talk. The effect of pulling hatred is full. What's wrong with deliberately comparing Gu Yanwan to them? Lu Jiwei frowned and looked displeased at Duan Shuman, saying, when will I worry about being too late? Duan Shuman was taken aback. Whether it's studying or working at night, it's her own life. I won't impose any interference, siblings. Please don't compare my children to each other casually. In my eyes, each one is the best. So obvious provocation, really treat her as blind. Duan Shuman smiled awkwardly, barely maintaining his expression. After finishing the meal, Duan Shuman quickly found a reason to take Gu Jiangxue away and avoid kneeling punishment. However, with just one sentence from Mr. Gu, he had manager Zhou personally lead Gu Jiangxue to the ancestral hall. The plan fell through, and Gu Jiangxue still had to kneel in the ancestral hall. Before leaving, her face was as white as snow, her eyes were gloomy, but when she looked at Gu Yanwan, there was a sinister dim light hidden. Gu Jiangxue was taken away, and even if Duan Shuman was unwilling, he had to bite his lip and go with his daughter. Gu Yanwan watched as the figures of the mother and daughter walked away, feeling a bit bored, and said, I'm going upstairs to rest. Before leaving, his gaze fell on Gu Jizhou for an instant and quickly moved away. Xiao Wu. Mrs. Gu handed Gu Jizhou a lunchbox and looked at his somewhat pale face with a helpless expression, saying, this is the soup I made myself. You can take it back and have some. At the family banquet just now, Gu Jizhou never touched his chopsticks from beginning to end. He has anorexia, and apart from things that Mrs. Gu personally does, he doesn't easily touch anything else. Mrs. Gu naturally knew that he had this problem, and had prepared the soup in advance before he arrived. Gu Jizhou took it and sighed, feeling a bit sorry. Could you please help me cook for me? Your health is not good. What does a family talk about? Although I have just been discharged, I can't even cook a meal, said Gu Laofu humanely. But you can't continue like this, your body won't be able to hold on sooner or later. She is really worried. In case she can't make food for him in the future, what if? She's not here. What should Xiao Wu do? Let's talk about it later. Gu has something else to attend to. I'll leave first. Remember to take your medicine on time. Gu Jizhou is not worried about his own situation, and even doesn't take it seriously. Seeing him like this, Mrs. Gu couldn't help but sigh lightly and said, I understand. The entrance door was closed again, and Mrs. Gu turned around and went upstairs. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of a slender figure leaning against the staircase. Gu Yanwan did not return to his room, but stood quietly on the second floor. When Mrs. Gu came up, she happened to retract her gaze towards the entrance. Late. Mrs. Gu was a bit surprised. Didn't you say you wanted to rest? Gu Yanwan let out an absent-minded sigh, frowning slightly, as if pondering something. What's wrong? Mrs. Gu asked. Is today's family banquet not very suitable? A smile flashed in her eyes, thinking that Gu Yanwan was nervous. You don't have to worry too much. There are already many people in the Gu family. Your second uncle, third uncle, and sister-in-law didn't come today. You're nervous now, and if you see them in the future, what will you do then? Mrs. Gu has always felt that Gu Yanwan is well-behaved and gentle. She may have never experienced such a family gathering today, and some discomfort is certain. Who knew that Gu Yanwan was just being distracted? Just as Mrs. Gu reached out to touch her, she suddenly regained her senses and looked at her. Her cold and indifferent gaze had a slight fluctuation, but it was fleeting and too fast to capture. It's okay, Grandma. I'll go back and rest first. After speaking, Gu Yanwan returned to his room. Mrs. Gu remained in place, gazing at her back with deep meaning in her eyes. Gu, the top-level office. After Shensu escaped from the Gu family's crematorium, he came here to wait. Although he knew that Gu Jizhou would definitely come, he still felt a bit restless. What should we do? What if that little ancestor disregards public opinion and fights with the fifth brother? Shensu scratched his head in frustration, and his carefully styled hairstyle now turned into a mess. Across from him sat an elegant and gentle man. He looked at Shensu's restlessness and reached out to push the gold-rimmed mirror frame, sighing lightly, "Don't worry, it's no use rushing." Shensu let out a mournful cry and said, "How can we not be in a hurry? Fifth brother doesn't know what the situation is yet." After speaking, he looked up and stared at the man across from him with unfriendly eyes. He gritted his teeth and said, "It's all you, Lin Chao. If it weren't for your delayed intelligence, how could we have been so passive?" Lin Chao calmly pushed the frame of the mirror and said, "According to the time of the Black Wanted notice published by the secret network, that person should have known the identity of Brother Wu half a month ago. Even if my intelligence is fast, it cannot be as fast as the secret network. Besides, since Gu Jizhou decided to go missing 2 years ago, the administrator account of the secret network has never logged in again. From then on, only one of the 2 managers remained, and the secret network was tightly controlled by the other, making it impossible for them to rely on the secret network to handle matters. Otherwise, it will expose its whereabouts. At least you should tell us quickly. Even if you hurry up a little, fifth brother won't accidentally run into that ancestor in the old house without any precautions." At this moment, the office doors suddenly pushed open, and Gu Jizhou walked in slowly, carrying the lunchbox specially prepared for him by Mrs. Gu, with a normal expression. Shensu stood up and quickly walked over to him. He looked up and down and confirmed that there was no incident behind him. He couldn't wait to ask, "Brother Wu, how is the situation?" Gu Jizhou gave him an indifferent glance and said, "What's going on?" Shensu was extremely anxious in his heart, but Gu Jizhou's indifferent attitude really drove him crazy. "Just that one, she didn't do anything to you, did she?" He didn't even dare to mention Gu Yanwan's name, and his voice confused him. Lin Chao also stood up, his eyes slightly deep behind the golden lenses. Although his face didn't show any signs, he was also very concerned about Shensu's question. Gu Jizhou put down his lunchbox, brought himself a glass of water, moistened his throat, and said, "It's okay." He couldn't help but smile as he thought about Gu Yanwan's obedient and gentle appearance today. 2 years without seeing each other, my temper has restrained quite a bit, and I have even learned to act obedient in front of others. End of this chapter. Chapter 8 Midnight Visitors. Be good. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Midnight Visitors. Be good. Shensu looked surprised and said curiously, "It shouldn't be. According to the temperament of that ancestor, it would be strange not to break you down completely." Surprisingly, Gu Jizhou walked out of the Gu family unscathed. Has that ancestor changed his nature in the past 2 years? Remembering her attitude towards herself when she was at Gu's house just now, Gu Jizhou's expression suddenly became helpless. "My temper has changed a lot, but I guess it won't be so easy to calm down." Lin Chao pushed down the golden mirror frame and asked, "What do you plan to do?" Gu Jizhou's cold eyes flickered and he chuckled, "Take a step and see, after all, it's really my fault first." Upon hearing his obviously helpless tone, Shensu sighed and said, "It's over. The days ahead will be easier for us." Lin Chao gave him a hand beside him and said, "Don't be so talkative." He turned his head to look at Gu Jizhou and said seriously, "Fifth brother, you asked me to keep an eye on Heisher before. There's been some movement." Gu Jizhou's eyes were slightly deep, and his fingers instinctively grasped the Buddha pearl. He spoke as expected, "There's an accident at the branch office in L City." Lin Chao nodded. Shensu looked bewildered and asked, "What happened?" Didn't we still be fine before we left? Lin Chao took out a folder and handed it to Gu Jizhou, saying, 2 days ago, Tang Weikai, the person in charge of his branch in L City, was exposed for accepting bribes and absconding with money. He has been listed on the wanted list of L City police and his whereabouts are still unknown. 2 days ago. It took us 2 days to return to the capital. Didn't it mean that as soon as we left, Mr. Tang's back had an accident? Shen Su thought it was very ridiculous. I don't even believe that there are no tricks in here. Lin Chao pushed down the golden mirror frame, nodded, and said, it should be the other party's dog jumping over the wall. Perhaps the people behind Tang Weikai felt that their contact had threatened him, so they didn't hesitate to cut off the tail. This also indicates that our investigation direction is not a problem. Mr. He, it must be related to that matter. Gu Jingzhou listened quietly, lowered his eyes and pondered for a long time before saying, stay tuned. Yes. Lin Chao mentioned a few suspicious things recently. Seeing that it was getting late, he left and even brought Shen Su with him before leaving. In the vast office, there was only one person left in an instant. Gu Jizhou sat on the swivel chair, his face not looking very good, and his stomach was slightly twisted, making his already slightly sickly appearance even more frail. With a pile of accumulated work on hand, he did not lie to Mrs. Gu. After nearly half a month in L City, there were countless cases that Gu had to deal with. Gu Jizhou's eyes fell on the piled-up mountains of documents, and for some reason, the cold expression of Gu Yanwan appeared in his mind, and a smile gradually appeared on his face. He took a sip of the soup prepared by Mrs. Gu for him, which had a faint medicinal aroma that should have been specially added to regulate his body. After handling everything, Gu Jizhou pinched his brow and looked at the clock on the wall wearily. It's already close to 12 o'clock. The night life in the capital is not over yet. Gu Jizhou looked for a while before getting up and leaving. In the underground garage, Ji Qian had been waiting for a long time. When he saw him come out, he approached and asked, Sir, is it back to Yunyuan? Yunyuan, the wealthiest villa area in the capital, has an excellent geographical location and is hard to find. Those who can have a place inside are either wealthy or noble. Gu Jizhou nodded. Yunyuan. The car slowly drove in and Ji Qian asked, Sir, why is it so late today? Gu Jizhou's routine has always been regular like that of an old cadre, and it is the first time he has been working until midnight like today. I don't know if it's his illusion, but I always feel that something is wrong with today's master. Yes. Did something happen? Ji Qian was puzzled in his heart. He didn't follow Gu Jizhou back to his old house, so he naturally didn't know what happened today. I didn't pay attention to the time for a moment. Gu Jizhou's tone was ordinary, but his fingers kept twisting the Buddhist beads, and his eyes narrowed slightly. I don't know why, but I feel like I won't be able to spend tonight peacefully. This intuition magnified to the extreme in the moment he opened the door. Gu Jizhou stood tall in front of the door, with one hand in his pocket, paused for a moment, and finally opened the door. Brushing the floor. All lights automatically turn on, and the entire room lights up like daylight. In the vast living room, a figure sat quietly on the sofa, skillfully turning the dagger in his hand. The blade was snow-white and sharp, flexibly flipping between the fingers with distinct joints. Gu Yanwan turned her head calmly, with a smile on her lips and a chill on her eyebrows. She paused word by word, Are you back? It seems like I knew he would come back early and when. Just so sudden, without any warning, appeared in his home. Gu Jizhou remained silent in place, but was not surprised. He walked in with a normal expression and sat opposite her. The first question he asked was, Aren't you worried about going out so late? The dagger flipped over in Gu Yanwan's hand stopped and she firmly held it in her hand. Upon hearing this, she asked in response, Do you think they will know that I'm out? Gu Jizhou chuckled and said, That's right. How could the Gu family have noticed her skill, wanting to quietly leave the door? So what? What are you here for? Gu Jizhou's gaze fell on the dagger in her hand, which was engraved with two words. Frost Cold. That was a birthday gift he gave her when she was 16 years old. However, at this moment, the dagger turned towards him. Sharp and sharp, with a clear killing intent. Gu Jizhou didn't care at all, as if the dagger didn't exist, and still looked at her with a gentle smile in his eyes. Gu Yanwan met his gaze and slowly opened her lips, saying, "Let's settle the accounts." She suddenly relaxed her sitting posture, casually speaking in a leisurely tone, and said calmly, "It's been 2 whole years since I disappeared. I've bought you my graveyard and even thought about what's engraved on the tombstone. But now, you're hiding in China, right? Gu Wuye." As she spoke, she adjusted the dagger slightly and aimed it precisely at his handsome and clear face. Gu Jizhou. Gu Jizhou fell into silence for a long time. He paused, with a tone that seemed to beg for mercy. "Ah Wan, spare my life. I usually call her late, but when I feel guilty, I call her Ah Wan. He is really stubborn." Gu Yanwan sneered and clenched the finger of the dagger slightly. "I'll spare you. Gu Wuye, the cemetery I chose is quite expensive. Why don't you use it today?" The next second, the dagger in his hand flew precisely and fiercely towards the man across from him. Gu Jingzhou reflexively turned his head on one side, and his sharp blade flew past his ear, piercing into the wall behind him. 3 parts into the wall. If this force really hits people, Gu Jizhou's eyelids twitched. She really wanted to kill him. Before he could say another word, Gu Yanwan kicked her over. The two of them came and went, fighting in the living room. Gu Yan attacked late, he defended. Late, before she could utter her complete words, Gu Yanwan took advantage of her unpreparedness and directly punched him in the face. Gu Jizhou. Hiss, in an instant, that stunning face swelled up. A trace of blood oozed from the corner of the lips. "It's really merciless." Gu Jizhou dodged her second punch and finally couldn't help but make a move, trying to stop her and calm her down. Who expected? Just as she was about to touch Gu Yanwan's shoulder, she suddenly stumbled and grabbed his wrist, pulling out the dagger from the wall, and then fell over her shoulder. Gu Jizhou only felt that the sky and earth were spinning around. In an instant, Gu Yanwan rode on him and fiercely stabbed down with a dagger in his hand. Gu Jizhou closed his eyes. Feeling a cold touch on the edge of his neck, he opened his eyes slightly and the dagger was stuck on the ground, pressing against his main artery. The hot and flowing blood beneath the skin contrasts sharply with the cold metallic touch. Gu Yanwan leaned down slightly, leaned close to his ear, slowly exhaled, and called out the address he had used in the Gu family's old house 4 hours ago. "Uncle. You better be good. Oh, roar. Let's fight. Let's fight." End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Is not just about simple characters. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 is not just about simple characters. Gu Jizhou was completely frozen, as she said, obediently motionless. However, there was a hint of avoidance in the eyes. Gu Yanwan looked down at him from a high position, unaware of this subtle change. His eyes were cold, with a hint of coldness. "Give you a minute to explain why you disappeared for 2 years, otherwise," Gu Yanwan chuckled lightly and said, "you can really consider what is engraved on the tombstone." During their conversation, Gu Jizhou remained motionless, feeling a bit helpless and even feeling a bit hopeless. He said, "Late at night, do we really want to continue talking like this?" Gu Yanwan raised her eyebrows and her eyes suddenly became sharp. "Why, can't we?" She moved her wrist lightly, and the tip of the knife moved along his neck to his collarbone, then pressed against his chest. Through the silk shirt, one can still feel the distinct and firm muscles under the fabric. Then she continued down. Gu Jizhou's eyes were dim, his voice tinged with hoarseness, and his tone was somewhat gritted. "Gu Yanwan." Gu Yanwan replied with a syllable and stopped his hand movements. The person with the same name and surname called her, and her indifferent face was finally tinged with other emotions. "Have you figured out a reason?" Mr. Gu Wu. Gu Jizhou smiled angrily. "I haven't seen him for 2 years, and as soon as we meet, I hold a dagger against his life gate. It's really impressive. He truly taught it firsthand." At this moment, Gu Jizhou really wanted to overturn this little bastard and beat her to the ground, but I still can't bear to part with it. He paused for a moment, and the anger that had just risen gradually dissipated. He unloaded his defense and without any hesitation, completely exposed his fatal weakness in front of Gu Yanwan. Gu Jizhou looked straight at her with clear and unobstructed eyes, and said softly, "You are well-rounded in your work. Before coming to the capital, you must have thoroughly investigated the Gu family's ancestors for 18 generations. What else can I tell you? The intelligence-gathering ability of the secret network is the world's #1. The identity of Gu Wuye in the capital has not been deliberately concealed, so it is easy to investigate. She is afraid that all his past experiences, including the details of daily life, have been cut to the bone by her." Gu Jizhou's prediction was good. As early as half a month ago, Gu Yanwan had read through all the intelligence about him. Just Gu Yanwan sneered with a stern tone and said, "Do you think I'll believe your lies about being unconscious in a car accident for 2 years? I can come and go freely in the midst of gunfire and bullets. In a car accident, I was knocked into a vegetative state. Gu Jizhou, do I look like a fool?" After a moment of silence, Gu Jizhou sighed lightly and said, "It's true." She froze for a moment, frowned, and said, "What are you saying?" Gu Jizhou looked up and met her gaze, with a gentle glint in her cold eyes. Gu Yanwan was momentarily swayed by his gaze. "The car accident is real, I didn't lie to you." However, the words spoken were as if a bucket of ice water had been punctured. Gu Yanwan had no smile in her eyes and her face darkened. The two faced each other, their intertwined gaze flowing like a dark tide. The atmosphere is silent. Suddenly, a vibration came from Gu Yan's pocket at night. She took out her phone and saw a small red dot on the upper right corner of the WeChat icon. Gu Yanwan glanced at him, his eyes slightly narrowed, looking lost in thought. The next second, she left Gu Jizhou and got up to reply to the message. When she turned around again, the other person was already sitting quietly on the sofa waiting for her, without any anger or other extreme reactions, as if the previous prank did not exist. Gu Yanwan looked at him, and apart from the swollen half of his face, he didn't even have a strand of hair messy. She stood in the same place, suddenly feeling a little convinced, and an impulse arose to beat up the other half of his face. After all, he restrained himself and sat opposite him. "What can I drink?" Gu Jizhou asked. Until now, he finally remembered to entertain guests. However, she cannot be considered a guest either. Gu Yanwan snorted softly, "No need." She lifted her eyes icy cold, suppressing her anger, and continued the previous conversation. "Last chance, to be honest." Gu Jizhou's expression remained unchanged, and the answer remained the same. The next moment. Bang! Gu Yanwan suddenly kicked the coffee table over, and the anger in her eyes finally couldn't be suppressed, completely released. Her voice was as cold as snow. "Very well, Gu Jizhou." Throwing down 6 words, she glanced at Gu Jizhou inexplicably and threw the door away. Gu Jingzhou remained silent in place for a long time before he pressed his brow in melancholy. "Tian-Ke. I don't know the palace in the sky, what year is tonight? This is the largest entertainment club in the capital and also the favorite place for wealthy, famous, and wealthy young men to relax. Indulge in extravagance and revelry. Top floor, VIP private room." Gu Yanwan pushed open the door and walked in with a calm face. Sitting in the booth, he exuded a terrifying aura, and his eyes were filled with a heart-wrenching anger. The other person in the private room was startled by her. "Ah Wan, who messed with you?" That was a sexy and exquisitely dressed woman leaning against the bar, shaking a freshly mixed cocktail in her hand as she slowly savored it. Seeing that Gu Yanwan's expression was not right, she twisted her waist and sat next to her, jokingly saying, "You're so angry, the other person is also a talented person." Gu Yanwan coldly glanced at the wine in her hand and said, "Pour me a glass of lemon water." The corners of the woman's mouth twitched. "Coming to this place, drinking only lemonade every time, you're also amazing." Although my mouth roast, I still obediently poured lemonade back. Gu Yanwan took a sip and his mood gradually calmed down. "Can you speak now? That person who doesn't have long eyes is bothering you. Do you need me to help you beat him up?" the woman asked with a smile. Gu Yanwan gave her a cool glance and said, "Gu Jizhou, dot." Mu Han choked a mouthful, put down his glass, and without hesitation changed his mouth. "The conflict between the two of you should be resolved on your own. She can't afford to provoke either of them." Gu Yanwan ignored her and suppressed the impatience in her eyes, asking, "What did you ask me to come over for?" Mu Han handed the tablet beside her with a serious tone. "As you expected, Tang Weikai absconded with the payment." Gu Yanwan glanced briefly and then threw it aside, ignoring it. "The police in L City have not arrested anyone and have issued a notice of joint investigation, which is wanted nationwide." Mu Han looked at her with a somewhat amused expression and said, "It was originally just a commercial case, but you added so much fire that you went straight to the wanted list. Not only accepting huge bribes, but also daring to privately bribe high-level leaders in L City. Exposed, safe and sound." Gu Yanwan nodded and said, "Keep an eye on him. When he arrives in the capital, let me know." Mu Han asked curiously, "Do you just believe that he can come to the capital? Tang Weikai, that useless person, is skilled in eating, drinking, and enjoying himself. Such things are probably difficult, and he may soon be arrested by the police." Gu Yanwan squinted her eyes and said, "I don't believe he has that ability, but I believe the He family will definitely bring him back to the capital. To survive by cutting off the tail, this tail cannot fall into the hands of outsiders." Mu Han nodded and said, "Cheng, I'll pay attention and bring you the person then." After finishing the business, we started chatting gossip. Mu Han took a sip of his wine and asked, "How does it feel to find his family?" Gu Yanwan lowered her head and fiddled with her phone, saying, "I don't feel anything." "How about the Gu family?" Gu Yan paused late, pondered for a moment, and gave a review. "They're not just simple characters." Mu Han's smile deepened and he said, "It seems that this family is really interesting to receive such an evaluation from you." End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Sun Divine Bull Force. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 10 Sun Divine Bull Force. The sound insulation effect of the private room is very good, and the noise outside cannot be transmitted. Mu Han arrived in the capital a few months ago, while Gu Yanwan stayed in D City for a while. The two of them didn't see each other for a while and chatted quite a bit. After talking for a while, Mu Han glanced at time and said, "It's very late. Why don't you stay with me?" Gu Yanwan refused, "No need. She came out secretly, and if Mrs. Gu finds out she sneaked out in the middle of the night, it will be unnecessary trouble." Mu Han nodded and didn't leave her. As soon as Gu Yanwan left, the door of the private room was pushed open again, and a man dressed as a waiter came in with a somewhat panicked expression. "Boss, someone is causing trouble below." Mu Han drank the last bit of wine from his glass calmly, and his bright face had now regained its usual cold and frosty appearance in front of outsiders. She glanced at the other person's anxious expression and sneered, "What are you panicking about?" After speaking, Mu Han put down his glass and stood up, with no expression on his face, his aura pressing. "Let's go and see which one doesn't have long eyes, causing trouble in my field." Over there, Gu Yanwan has already returned to the old house. On the second floor, Gu Tingyu, who had already slept for a while and came out to pick up a glass of water to drink, faintly felt a black shadow flashing by the window. She blinked her sleepy eyes, yawned, and forced out 2 drops of physiological saline, feeling drowsy and hallucinating. After returning to the room, Gu Yanwan did not sleep, but turned on the computer. Just now on my way back, my phone kept ringing. Sleeping trough brother, are you here? To be honest, there's an issue with the secret website. What about you, the administrator? Big brother, I'm begging you. Why don't you go online and take a look? I don't believe you're already asleep. Gu Yanwan calmly logged into her account, and the person was still chatting. She lowered her eyes and impatiently replied 2 words. Shut up. The person immediately remained silent. The secret forum has exploded. Coming again, being attacked again, Sun God may have to stay up late again tonight. Laughing to death, the chief hacker has become a network security guard, and why God really knows how to use people. Let me see, how many people are there this time? Do you look down on Sun God or something? Sun is amazing, he can easily take on more than a dozen top hackers on his own, killing crazy people. Next comes a row of Sun God Bull Force. Gu Yanwan briefly browsed through and roughly figured out what had happened. Since its establishment, the secret network, as the world's largest intelligence organization, has been coveted by countless people. Websites like Tonight have been attacked by hackers hundreds of times. It's been almost 10 times in just these 2 months. Gu Yanwan was somewhat lacking in enthusiasm. At this moment, the chat box popped up. Ting. You are finally online. Ting. Sun God has been confronting them for almost 2 hours. Why, he can handle it. Ting. Are you so confident? This time you're a well-known expert on the Hacker Alliance leaderboard. Are you sure that guy from Sun can handle it? Why, do you think the chief hacker's chief came for nothing? Ting. 666, I miss someone who is a big shot, but ended up selling myself to you, an unscrupulous businessman, and I'm at a loss. Gu Yanwan sneered, blocked and blacklisted the whole process, ignored him, and clicked on another person's chat box. Why, how is the situation? It seems that they are busy over there, and it's been a while before they return. Sun. A group of idiots. Gu Yanwan hooked his lips and typed, I'll give you a raise next month. Sun. Thank you, boss. Afterwards, the 2 of them didn't continue chatting. Gu Yanwan knew he was busy and went offline to rest. Outside the bedroom door, receiving water and returning to the room, Gu Tingyu caught a dark figure in the hallway. Sleeping slot. She suddenly woke up, covered her chest with her hand, and was frightened into a heart attack. Upon closer inspection, it was Gu Nansheng. He was wearing blue pajamas, with messy hair that looked like a chicken coop. His expression was tired and drowsy, except for his bright eyes, which were stained with uncontrollable madness. South students. Gu Tingyu let out an uncertain shout, and the other person looked up and poured a cup of coffee over her. Gu Tingyu scolded in a low voice, are you staying up late playing games again? Gu Nansheng, do you want to die? Do you know that you are in your 3rd year of high school this year? Gu Nansheng yawned, his throat a bit hoarse, and lazily said, what's the name of a ghost in the middle of the night? Go back to your room and sleep on your sleep. Gu Tingyu was almost infuriated by him. But this guy has always had the temperament of a mischievous demon king, unwilling to be controlled, and no one in the family can cure him, including her. Although Gu Tingyu was so angry that his lungs hurt, he had no choice but to stand in front of Mr. Gu and Mrs. Gu's bedroom. They couldn't shout and disturb the 2 elderly people in the middle of the night, could they? You go to bed quickly and attend class seriously tomorrow. Gu Nansheng let out an absent-minded sigh. Extremely arrogant. Gu Tingyu said. She clenched her fingers as she pinched the water glass and asked, what game can you be so obsessed with? ignoring all the important things. Gu Nanxing paused for a moment, then sneered, enthusiased. They deserve it too. Gu Tingyu wanted to ask something more, but the other party had already turned around and closed the door. Gu Tingyu sighed and returned to his room. The next day, Gu Nanxing drooped his eyelids and went downstairs, with the black circles under his eyes eye-catching. He was completely listless and disheartened. Only Gu Tingyu is at the dinner table. Gu Linbai and his wife went to work early in the morning, and even Gu Tingyuan received a task and rushed back to the liaison office. She watched as Gu Nanxing sat down like a wandering soul, couldn't help but ask, "Why don't you take a day off today?" Looking at the situation, "I even slept on the table when I went to school." "Please fart." Gu Nanxing took a bite of the bread and spoke vaguely, "Senior high school student, what kind of leave are you taking?" You know that you are a senior in high school, even when you are old." Gu Tingyu didn't say anything more and left with him. After breakfast, he went straight to school. When Gu Yanwan woke up, the house was already empty. Mrs. Gu, who was pruning flowers and branches in the yard, saw her come out and a smile appeared on her face. Late at night, got up. Gu Yan nodded later and said hello. Mrs. Gu's gaze fell on her. She was not wearing the same outfit as yesterday, but it was also quite formal and she was carrying a black backpack. "Are you going out?" Gu Yanwan nodded and took out his phone to take a look, saying, "Go meet a friend." Mrs. Gu didn't ask her what friends a person who had just arrived in the capital would have, but smiled and said, "Go ahead, be careful of your safety." The phone shook and Gu Yanwan lowered her gaze. "Fu Xianming. I'm here." She left the old house and saw a seductive and eye-catching sports car parked on the roadside not far away. A figure leaned against the car and immediately stood up straight when she came over. The newcomer looks delicate and pure, with a pair of peach blossom eyes that are delicate and beautiful, but do not show any femininity, but instead add a layer of charm and elegance. Fu Xianming greeted her with a smile on his face, almost flattering as he held her backpack and said, "Boss, if you're here, don't tell me earlier. I can take you on a tour of the capital." Young Master Fu is famous for his love of playing. Gu Yanwan glanced at him with a cold expression in his eyes. Fu Xianming immediately fell silent and quietly opened the car door for her like a chicken. After getting on the car, Fu Xianming asked, "Boss, where are you going?" Gu Yanwan pressed her wrist, her delicate and fair slender wrist adorned with a black wristband. Without looking up, she spoke directly, "See your old man." End of this chapter.